Something extraordinary is happening right now on the battlefields of Ukraine, and the numbers coming out of the front lines in the first days of June 2026 are so staggering, so historically unprecedented, that even the most seasoned military analysts are struggling to find the right words to describe them. This is not spin, this is not propaganda, this is verified data from Western intelligence agencies, independent research institutions, and battlefield tracking organizations that have been monitoring this war from its very first hour. And what they are showing the world right now is the systematic, accelerating, irreversible collapse of what was once called the second most powerful military force on the planet. Let that sink in for a moment. The army that marched into Ukraine in February 2022 with the declared intention of conquering Kyiv in 72 hours has now, as of June 5th, 2026, suffered approximately 370,990 personnel losses. That is not a typo. That is not an exaggeration. That figure comes directly from Ukraine's General Staff daily combat reports, cross-referenced with estimates from Dutch military intelligence, Britain's GCHQ director, Western officials cited by Bloomberg, and CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies in Washington. Every single one of these organizations, using different methodologies, arriving from different directions, is converging on the same horrifying conclusion. Russia's military is bleeding out in real time, faster than it can be replenished, faster than the Kremlin can acknowledge, and faster than any great power has bled in any conflict since the Second World War. So let's go inside these numbers. Let's understand exactly what they mean, exactly how we got here, and exactly why the next 6 to 9 months on this front may determine the outcome of the entire war. Start with the daily toll, because it puts everything else in context. On June 1st, 2026, Ukraine's General Staff reported 1,410 Russian soldiers killed or wounded in a single day. On June 2nd, that figure was 1,240. On June 3rd, it was 1,130. On June 4th, 1,300. On June 5th, 1,550. Those are not anomalies. Those are not peaks. That is the new normal pace of Russian attrition in this war, a tempo of destruction so relentless that over the past calendar month, total Russian losses exceeded 30,000 personnel. 30,000 human beings removed from the battlefield in a single month. Now compare that to what is happening on the recruitment side, because this is where the story shifts from tragedy to structural catastrophe for Russia. The Kremlin entered 2026 with a stated target of signing 409,000 new contract soldiers for the year. That works out to roughly 100 to 150 new recruits every single day. But by the end of the first quarter of 2026, German analyst Janis Klug, whose research on Russian regional budget data has become one of the most respected tracking tools in the academic community, published findings showing that actual daily recruitment had dropped to between 800 and 1,000 people. That is a decline of roughly 20% compared to the same period in 2025. Monthly recruitment was hovering around 30,000 new soldiers at best. Here's the math that the Kremlin does not want its own people to see. In the first quarter of 2026, Ukraine killed or wounded approximately 89,000 Russian troops. In the same quarter, Russia recruited approximately 70,000 to 80,000 new soldiers. For the first time in the entire history of this war, outflow was exceeding inflow. And this deficit, this negative balance between losses and recruitment, has now persisted for 5 consecutive months, running from December 2025 straight through to April 2026. Ukraine's Unmanned Systems Forces commander Robert Magyar stated it plainly. Between December 2025 and April 2026, Russia mobilized and recruited 148,400 personnel. In the same period, confirmed losses from drone strikes alone reached $156,735. The math is working against Putin, and it is only getting worse. March 2026 set a record that nobody celebrating in Moscow wanted to acknowledge. In that single month, Russia lost 351 soldiers, killed or seriously wounded. According to the LBC analysis, citing Ukrainian military intelligence analyst Olena Horyanova, that was the highest monthly figure the Russian army had suffered since the full-scale invasion began. The spring of 2026 collectively, March and April combined, saw more than 70,000 Russian soldiers taken off the battlefield. If May follows the same trajectory, and early June data strongly suggests it will, then the entire spring offensive window will have cost Russia north of 100,000 men. And here's the detail that makes those losses even more devastating than they look on paper. The cost per square kilometer of territory captured has exploded to a level that defies military logic. In 2025, Russia was paying roughly 120 soldiers for every square kilometer it seized. By 2026, that figure has ballooned to 316 soldiers per square kilometer. That is a 163% increase in the blood price of territorial progress. In April 2026, Russian forces advanced just 53 square kilometers in the Donetsk region, while losing 25,000 troops on the same axis. To understand how catastrophic that ratio is, consider that even the grinding industrial slaughter of the Western Front in World War I rarely produced kill rates that punishing relative to the ground gained. And then, right at the moment the Kremlin thought its 2026 summer offensive window was about to open, something happened that the Institute for the Study of War called historically significant. In April 2026, Russia recorded its first net territorial loss since Ukraine's Kursk incursion in August 2024. ISW data confirmed Russian forces lost control of 116 square kilometers net during April. Then, in the 4 weeks from May 5 to June 3, 2026, Russia recorded a further net loss of 93 square miles of Ukrainian territory, roughly the land area of Martha's Vineyard, double the losses from the previous 4-week period. The direction of travel has reversed. The army that was slowly grinding forward across Donetsk is now being pushed backward in multiple sectors simultaneously. What changed? What cracked the wall that Russia had been slowly, agonizingly pushing through? The answer is drones, and the scale of what Ukraine has accomplished with unmanned systems in 2026 is genuinely transforming how modern warfare is understood. According to Ukraine's unmanned systems forces, by June 5, 2026, Russia had lost 329,772 UAVs since the beginning of the war. In a single day on June 4th, 2,111 Russian drones were neutralized. On June 5th, 2,046 more. These are not intercepted attack drones. These are Russian military assets, destroyed, jammed, or captured before they can accomplish their missions. Ukraine's drone forces have essentially created an air denial environment over the front lines that is bleeding Russia's eyes and its reach simultaneously. But even that number does not capture the full picture of what drones are doing to Russian ground forces. The unmanned systems forces statistical breakdown is stark. 95% of current Russian casualties are now attributable to drone strikes. Think about what that means operationally. It means there's nowhere to hide. It means moving a tank, changing a trench position, driving a supply truck, or walking across an open field have all become potentially lethal actions at any hour of the day or night. Ukrainian thermal-equipped drones can see body heat in darkness. Ukrainian FPV kamikaze drones can thread through tree lines and enter trench systems. Ukrainian Baba Yaga heavy bombers can drop anti-tank mines on logistics routes from altitudes that make interception nearly impossible. The battlefield that Russian soldiers are operating in today is fundamentally different from the one their commanders trained for, and Russian doctrine has not adapted fast enough to keep pace with the killing. Now let's talk about equipment, because the hardware losses tell a story just as damning as the personnel numbers. As of June 5th, 2026, Ukraine's General Staff cumulative equipment totals for Russia read as follows: 11,780 tanks destroyed, damaged, or captured, 24,684 armored fighting vehicles, 43,315 artillery systems, 1,132 multiple launch rocket systems, 144 anti-aircraft warfare systems, 436 aircraft, 353 helicopters, 33 ships and boats, 2 submarines, 300 vehicles and cisterns. The tank figure alone is extraordinary. Russia began the full-scale invasion in February 2022 with roughly 12,000 to 13,000 operational tanks. By June 2026, losses have essentially consumed the entirety of that original force. Yes, Russia has been pulling T-54 and T-55 tanks out of Cold War-era storage, machines designed in the 1940s and 1950s, to fill the gaps at the front. That is not a sign of military strength. That is a sign of a military scraping the bottom of its material reserves. The air defense picture is equally alarming for Moscow. Ukraine's unmanned systems forces released data showing that in the first 5 months of 2026 alone, Ukrainian drones struck 174 Russian air defense assets, including surface-to-air missile systems, radar stations, and electronic warfare equipment. The estimated replacement value of those destroyed systems exceeds $4 billion. Air defense is not just hardware. It is the protective umbrella that allows command posts to operate, logistics convoys to move, and soldiers to sleep. Every system destroyed tears another hole in that umbrella, and Ukraine is exploiting each gap the moment it opens. The intelligence context behind all of this is equally revealing. On May 29, 2026, Anne Keast Butler, the director of GCHQ and the head of Britain's top intelligence agency, made a public statement that stopped observers cold. She said that nearly 500,000 Russian soldiers have been killed in Ukraine since 2022. Killed, not wounded, not missing, dead. That figure exceeds total American military fatalities in all of World War II. Britain's most senior intelligence official, citing classified assessments, placed Russia's death toll in Ukraine above one of the defining tragedies of the 20th century. And that statement came from a country that has every reason to be conservative with its public assessments. The Netherlands Military Intelligence and Security Service, MIVD, went even further in its April 2026 assessment, estimating that Russia has suffered 2 million permanent losses since the invasion began, including more than 500,000 dead. The Economist, in its May 17, 2026 analysis, put the range at 1 million to 5 million total casualties. Bloomberg, citing Western officials in February 2026, placed the cumulative figure at 2 million, noting that this included approximately 430,000 casualties in 2024 and 415,000 in 2025. CSIS, in its January 2026 report, noted that since February 2022, Russian forces have suffered more losses than any major power in any single conflict since the Second World War. Sit with that for a moment. More losses than any major power in any conflict in 80 years. And yet the Kremlin has never officially acknowledged the scale of what is happening. In Moscow, this is still called a special military operation. The word war remains legally dangerous to use in Russia. And the death notices keep arriving in Buryatia, Tuva, Dagestan, and the other economically depressed regions that are disproportionately supplying the cannon fodder. Ethnic minorities and people from Russia's poorest corners are dying at rates far exceeding their share of the national population. The Kremlin's social contract, fight for us and prosper, is cashing its checks in the furthest, most forgettable corners of the Russian Federation. The recruitment crisis, to return to it one more time because its implications are severe, is now visibly warping Russian society in ways that go beyond the front line. Regional governments across Russia have been raising signing bonuses to unprecedented levels to try to meet recruitment quotas. The average signing bonus reached 47 million rubles in March 2026, with some regions offering 55 million rubles median. But the money is not working the way it used to. When soldiers are being killed within 2 weeks to 1 month of signing their contracts, according to Estonian analyst Artur Rehai, citing Forbes data, even life-changing money starts to look like inadequate compensation for near-certain death. Recruitment is responding to that reality. The Kremlin's daily target was 100 to 150 new soldiers. The actual figure fell to 940 per day, a 20% shortfall. Approximately 40% of new recruits now come from what Ukrainian intelligence describes as vulnerable population groups, meaning prisoners, people carrying heavy debts, and those being pressured through amnesties or financial coercion. Some universities have reportedly been instructed to ensure a portion of their student bodies sign military contracts. Russia is no longer an army looking for soldiers. It has become a machine searching for bodies. The strategic consequences of this arithmetic play out on the map in ways that are becoming impossible for the Kremlin's war planners to manage. Putin entered 2026 with a detailed offensive blueprint, a vision for a summer campaign that would push Russian forces through the remaining defended sections of Donetsk and link the Donetsk and Zaporizhzhia front lines into a single operational zone. That plan required elite mechanized forces, coherent logistics, and a manpower reserve large enough to sustain tempo over weeks and months of offensive pressure. None of those conditions currently exist. The Russian rate of advance, measured by ISW across the first 4 months of 2026, fell to an average of just 9 square kilometers per day. In the same period of 2025, that average was 76 square kilometers per day. The Russian offensive machine has lost 2/3 of its pace, and it is still hemorrhaging manpower at record rates. What is particularly devastating for Russian operational planning is where the losses are concentrated. According to battlefield assessments, the elite naval infantry units that Moscow had positioned as its best shock troops for the 22-26 summer campaign have been taking catastrophic losses in Zaporizhzhia and Donetsk. Units that took years to train for amphibious assault and rapid offensive operations have been condemned to static trench warfare by Russia's chronic infantry shortage, and they are being ground down in mud and drone fire at rates that make their nominal elite status irrelevant. When you need to use your best people to plug ordinary defensive gaps, your offensive spearheads do not exist anymore. Meanwhile, Ukraine's drone campaign has done something that most military analysts did not anticipate at this scale. It has systematically destroyed Russia's logistics infrastructure at the operational level. Ukrainian long-range drones have struck the Ilsky oil refinery in Krasnodar. They struck the Kronstadt naval base near St. Petersburg on June 3rd, hitting the missile corvette Boyki at a distance of more than 1,100 kilometers from Ukrainian territory. They struck the St. Petersburg oil terminal. Earlier in the spring, drone attacks hit all 3 of Russia's major western oil export ports, including Novorossiysk on the Black Sea and Primorsk, and Ust-Luga on the Baltic. cutting export capacity by an estimated 40% and costing Russia more than $1 billion in lost oil revenue in a single week, according to Bloomberg's March 2026 analysis. When your energy export infrastructure is on fire and your supply convoys to the front are being hunted by kamikaze drones, the question of how you sustain an army of 1 million men becomes genuinely difficult to answer. And then there's what is happening inside the army itself. The stories emerging from the front, documented by Russian journalists like Sergei Komov, confirmed by leaked court records and UN Human Rights Council submissions, describe a military institution undergoing internal social collapse. Prison culture entered the army when Russia recruited criminals en masse from its penal colonies in 2023 and 2024. Organized crime structures formed inside military units. Soldiers at the front are reportedly paying gang protection money to avoid being sent to the most exposed positions. Officers are afraid to confront these informal power structures. A parallel authority has emerged within Russian battalions that, in some cases, overrides the formal chain of command. Russia's defense ministry issues orders. The gangs decide who follows them. Desertion has accelerated to levels the Kremlin has never publicly acknowledged. A report submitted to the UN Human Rights Council confirmed more than 50,000 desertions as of early 2026. That figure, 10% of estimated combat personnel, is expected to exceed 70,000 by the end of the year. The number of desertion cases formally filed in Russian courts in 2026 alone has passed 20,000. Russia deployed Chechen Akhmat barrier forces to stop soldiers from fleeing the front and documented at least 30 executions of soldiers who refused orders. But the strategy produced the opposite of its intended effect. For a soldier caught between barrier forces at the rear and Ukrainian drones at the front, surrender to Ukraine became the rational calculation. Ukraine's I Want to Live surrender program, launched in 2022, has now received more than 35,000 applications from active-duty Russian soldiers. More than 10,000 have been successfully captured, with a weekly average running between 60 and 90 surrenders. At one peak moment, 350 soldiers gave themselves up in a single week. The project's most disturbing finding, and Ukrainian intelligence has publicly shared this, is that some applications are being submitted not from the front, but from Russian training bases. Soldiers are planning how to surrender before they ever hear a shot fired in anger. And here's the detail that encapsulates perhaps better than any other the moral condition of the Russian military in June 2026. According to Al-Azhar's frontline reporting, some Russian soldiers surrendered to Ukraine specifically because Ukrainian drones had dropped food into their trenches. Their own army could not feed them. The enemy's army was feeding them. In that context, putting down your rifle is not defeat. It is the only rational decision available. Russia's 30th Brigade offers perhaps the most dramatic single data point. 2,000 soldiers deserted simultaneously, more than half the brigade. Most were contract soldiers whose service terms had already expired, but who were being forcibly retained at the front without rotation. Barrier units, penalties, threats of prosecution. None of it stopped 2,000 men from collectively saying no at the same moment. This was not panic. This was organized collective refusal. It represents something militaries understand to be among the most dangerous social phenomena in any army, the point at which the gap between the institution's demands and its soldiers' tolerance for sacrifice becomes unbridgeable. The equipment picture feeds directly back into this human picture. Oryx, the open-source intelligence project that counts only visually confirmed losses, has documented more than 4,000 Russian tanks destroyed, damaged, captured, or abandoned. To replace what has been lost, Russia has been pulling armor out of Soviet-era storage facilities, including T-54 and T-55 tanks designed in the late 1940s. Russian Commander-in-Chief Syrsky reported that Ukrainian forces hit more than 159 Russian tanks in a recent year-to-date period alone, along with more than 2,500 armored vehicles. The armored force that Russia is putting into the field in 2026 is older, less capable, and more poorly maintained than the force it started with. Ukraine's FPV drones are ending T-54s the same way they ended T-90s. So where does this all lead? Well, the June 3rd, 2026 Russia Matters analysis of ISW data offers the clearest current snapshot. In the 4 weeks ending June 3rd, Russia recorded a net loss of 93 square miles of territory it had previously controlled. That is double the net loss from the previous 4-week period. The Russian rate of territorial gain over the past 12 months, averaging 108 square miles per month, has turned negative. For an operation that was supposed to deliver the conquest of all of Donetsk and connect the front to the Crimean land corridor, the strategic arithmetic is now running in the wrong direction. British Defense Secretary John Healey stated it plainly in recent weeks. The Russian army is recruiting fewer soldiers than it is losing. That negative balance has held for 5 consecutive months. Carnegie senior analyst Michael Kaufman, one of the most respected Russia watchers in Western academic circles, has said that these methods cannot deliver an operational breakthrough. The Ukrainian military's own Third Corps commander has stated his assessment that the next 6 to 9 months represent the most critical window of the entire war, the period in which the current trajectory either solidifies into a strategic turning point or collapses into renewed stalemate. What makes this moment different from previous periods of apparent Ukrainian advantage is the depth of the structural damage that has now been done to Russia's military institution. Previous analysts of this war, including those skeptical of Ukrainian success, always noted Russia's demographic and industrial backstop. Yes, the army is taking losses, but Russia has 145 million people and a defense industry operating on a war footing. That backstop argument has not disappeared, but it has weakened in ways that matter. Industrial production of shells, vehicles, and missiles cannot compensate for losses in trained, experienced small unit leaders. A contract soldier recruited in March 2026, given 2 to 3 weeks of training, and sent to the Pokrovsk direction in April, is not a replacement for the battalion commander killed in February. Experience does not scale. Leadership cannot be printed. And Ukraine's drone operators have become extraordinarily skilled at finding and eliminating the experienced officers who provide whatever coherence Russian unit tactics still possess. The intelligence agencies of multiple NATO countries are now seeing the same data and reaching the same conclusion. The Economist placed the range at 1:1. 5 million total Russian casualties. Bloomberg placed it at 2 million. The Dutch intelligence service placed it at 2 million permanent losses with more than 500,000 dead. Britain's top intelligence official placed the death toll alone near 500,000. These are not activist organizations. These are not Ukrainian propaganda outlets. These are the intelligence and analytical organs of Western states, with every reason to be cautious and precise in what they say publicly. They are all looking at the same battlefield and arriving at the same verdict. Russia is losing this war of attrition. It is losing it faster than it was 6 months ago, and the pace is accelerating. None of this means the war is over. Russia still occupies roughly 20% of Ukraine's internationally recognized territory, including Crimea, large portions of Donetsk, Luhansk, Zaporizhia, and Kherson oblasts. Its military is damaged but not destroyed. Putin has not yet resorted to general mobilization, and the political calculus of that decision remains as complex as it was in 2022, when 261,000 Russians fled the country in the days following the first partial mobilization announcement. But the window for avoiding that choice is narrowing. Every month that recruitment falls short of losses, every week that ISW records a net Russian territorial loss, every day that 300 to 150 Russian soldiers are removed from the battlefield, the options available to Moscow contract a little further. And on the Ukrainian side, the drone army that has transformed this war is not standing still. 174 Russian air defense systems destroyed in the first 5 months of 2026 alone, valued at $4 billion. Long-range strikes reaching naval bases near St. Petersburg, oil terminals on the Baltic, refineries in Krasnodar. Every air defense node that Ukraine destroys is one less barrier between its missiles and the targets behind the Russian lines. Every logistics route that Ukrainian Baba Yaga drones mine at night is one less avenue for the ammunition and food and fuel that Russian trench soldiers need to stay in the fight. The question being debated in military analysis circles right now is not whether Russia is losing this attritional contest. The data has answered that question. The question is whether the cumulative damage reaches a threshold, a point of institutional failure, before Russia makes a political decision to escalate the war in a different direction, whether through mass mobilization, through expanded strikes on Ukrainian population centers, or through some form of negotiated pause that allows its military to reconstitute. Putin's room for any of those choices is shrinking. Declaring mass mobilization triggers the internal political crisis he has spent 4 years trying to prevent. Continuing the current trajectory means bleeding to a point where the front lines become structurally indefensible. Seeking a negotiated pause acknowledges failure in a conflict he told the Russian people was a limited special operation. There is no elegant exit visible from the Kremlin window right now. There is only the daily arithmetic of the front. 390 personnel, 11,180 tanks, 43,115 artillery systems, 329,772 drones. 5 consecutive months of recruitment deficits, 93 square miles of net territorial loss in 4 weeks, every number pointing in the same direction, every data point confirming the same conclusion. Ukraine is not just surviving. It is dismantling Putin's army, systematically, relentlessly, one drone strike at a time. And the numbers tell us, with an honesty that no Kremlin press release can challenge, that this dismantling is accelerating. We will keep tracking these developments as the summer front season unfolds. The next few months will determine whether the momentum visible in these numbers translates into the strategic shift that Western military analysts are beginning to call inevitable. Stay with us for every update.